So first things first. Hello. We are the Facilitation Partnership, and we're all about making the complex simple to work with. Our work is all about meetings, our work is about facilitation, and we work with clients around the world. We're absolutely delighted to be with you today, virtually. It's a great chance to meet you, and thank you so much for the questions that you've sent in already. We're working on meetings that count. I'd like to introduce my colleague, Helen Chapman, and I'm Hennessy. We'll be working with you over the next about 50 minutes. We'll be working with you in different ways. So I'm going to lead us through the process. I'm also going to work so we can engage and we can make this an interactive session. Helen is going to introduce much of the content, and together we'll pick up on questions that you raise. So that's a point about your role during this. As we work through together today, there'll be different ways that you can give your input and ideas. We'll be asking you to raise a virtual hand at points. We'll be asking you to vote on different sections, and we'll also be asking you directly to input your ideas. The great thing about having this large group of people connected is that we can really benefit from all of your thinking. That's the work of meetings. So this session is about you gaining some insights into some of the absolute must-do secrets of success when it comes to having meetings that count. We're going to share some things to help you avoid common pitfalls, and we're going to offer you a thinking framework that you can use in whatever meeting you're in whatever role you're in, to help you make effective choices when you're planning, when you're designing, when you're leading, and when you're in a meeting. And what you've asked for and what we're going to offer are some quick, practical tips that you can assimilate into your practice, into your work here on in. What we've also done in thinking about what to share with you over this period are your questions. So thank you for sending those through. And some of the themes that we picked out from what you said are: how do you keep people focused when you're in that room with them? How do you keep that meeting on track? And also, how do you bring it back when it goes off course? And we were really fascinated to see what you were saying about what do you do when you're working with senior colleagues and they go off topic. Is there anything different about that? Is there anything different about the way that you work when you're with them? And also that question about how do you decide what to put into an agenda so you keep people focused, keep people on track, and actually keep those senior leaders engaged as well. As we run this session, there's a live Twitter feed going on managed by our colleague Tom Russell, and you'll see the address there. Please join in. We want to talk with you. Right. First question. Over to you. I wonder how many meetings you've been in over the last week. I'd like you to consider the last meeting you were in and to have a look at these faces. Thinking about you in that meeting, which one of these faces best describes how you might have been looking as you went through that experience? Number 1, 2, 3, or 4. When you're ready, please place your vote. Okay, well, I'm happy to say, looks like about a third of you would put number 1, that smiling face, on as your descriptor. I'm very sad to say that about 11% of you would give number 2. And slightly mystified, I'm intrigued to see that 39% of you would give number 3 as the face of your meeting. And I wonder what you were thinking there. And 18% of you described yourselves as looking like number 4. Wow. So the thing about meetings is that real people come to them and real people experience a lot of emotion as we're going through this. So what do you do? How do you handle it? Because meetings are a bit like this. There's masses of information coming at you about people, about information, about yourself as you're working through a meeting. So we'd like you to think about where to start, and we'll offer you some help right now.
Thank you, Catherine. So, you know, when I look at that slide with all of the colour on there, We chose it purposefully because it represents, as Catherine said, the rush of information, sensory information that comes at you in a meeting. Maybe that's how you're feeling. Maybe that's about what people are saying, whether you're agreeing, disagreeing, whether you've tuned out. It's a bit like looking at the colour in a kaleidoscope. You know, a children's kaleidoscope where when you first look down the tube, all of that riot of colour exists. And then, as you turn the tube, the colour forms into different shapes, and you can make sense of those shapes as you look. Inspired by that kaleidoscope, we've created a meeting kaleidoscope to help you and also to help us know where to start. The meeting kaleidoscope helps us make sense of the barrage of information that's coming at us. The content, the people, the process, the purpose. We're going to look at those elements in more detail as we work through this webinar. And as Simon Sinek is now famous for saying, let's start with why. That sweet spot in the middle of the kaleidoscope is there on purpose. Because when you have people, process and content all working on behalf of the meeting objectives, and they are focused on the purpose of the meeting, this sweet spot happens. And if any of those elements are missing, or there's too much or too little of one of them, then you find that the whole sense of purpose is lost. So, in this order, and purposefully in this order as well, is to get clarity on your meetings, get clear about the big why. Understand who is in the room, who should be in the room. The brains of the meeting without which the meeting would not be possible. The how of the meeting, the process, how you get from beginning the meeting to the end of the meeting. The process is the golden key that unlocks the potential in every conversation to be had. And, maybe surprisingly last, still important, is the content, the information being shared, the subjects being discussed, debated and decided. Let's look at them each in turn. Purpose. You might recognize a model like this. You think about your team, you think about your region, you think about your organization. Looking down the list of all of you on this call, we can see there are some very important organizations that are obviously very intentional about where they're going, about what they're doing and why they're doing it. Our question for you is, how aligned are the meetings that you have day by day, week by week, month by month? How much do they line up to the overall big goals and the overall purpose or vision or mission of the organization? We come across people who are having meetings because, well, this meeting always happens on a Tuesday. It's a rhythm we've got into, and we've sort of forgotten why we're doing it. We just always do. Here's the trick. If you can draw a line, a straight line from the bottom of that pyramid straight to the top, then yeah, you're clear, you're intentional, your meetings are joined up to the big why. If you can't draw a direct line, our question for you is, why are you having the meeting? And then, assuming you've got real clear purpose in your mind, what about the people in your meeting? The human beings without which the meeting wouldn't be possible. Who's there? Why are they there? What are they contributing? How are we making the best of them being there? And what about you? Do you know why you're there? Do you know what you're contributing? The top tip from us to you is if you don't know why your contribution is needed to the next meeting that you go to, find a way to politely decline. Thinking about people a little bit more, there are different roles, there are different reasons for people in meetings. So for example, there might be a meeting owner, the person who's called the meeting, the person who said, get these people into a room, we need to talk about this. Are you a meeting owner? If you are, you've got the responsibility to make sure you have a clear purpose for that meeting, that you intentionally invite the right people into that room to have the right conversations that really will enable that purpose. It's a big responsibility. Sometimes meeting owners say, oh yes, we know why, and yes, people are clear, but when we ask people in their meetings, there's no clarity at all. So the meeting owner has a big responsibility. And what about a meeting participant? That's another role. I'm assuming that you're a meeting participant. And just one thing. Sometimes we hear meeting participants being referred to as delegates. We hear that in maybe hotels or conference centres. And the word delegate really is about bodies present. Our request to you is to scrap that word delegate and replace it with the word participant, because it describes in one word the act of taking part. And taking part in meetings is very different to simply being present. If you're a participant, make sure that you find out why your contribution is needed and for what purpose. There are other roles too, like experts. There might be somebody expert from finance or HR, from marketing. There might be an expert in the shape of the boss. So their expertise might be about making a decision. One big watch out. If there are experts in your meeting, or you have a perception about somebody's role in a meeting, beware of not putting a label on them. By that I mean, he's from finance. He'll want everything in numbers. She's from HR. She'll want to talk about how we're all feeling. He's from marketing. He likes to draw pictures. He's the boss. We won't be able to really say what we think. Inadvertently, you may well be putting labels on the people in the meetings that you have. And putting a label on somebody, whether it's because of their job role, or whether because you think they're extrovert or introvert, you know, they'll either talk too much or they won't talk at all, is just a misdirection. It's unhelpful, and it leads you to put labels on that then will inhibit the way you interact with people. So the top tip is to stop thinging. Stop thinging the people in your meetings and stop thinging meetings themselves. I hear a lot people say, I've got a meeting and another meeting, and I've got a race between one meeting and another. I've got back-to-back meetings. It's almost like the size of my influence depends on how many meetings I can go to. I can tell you that Catherine and I see people in businesses, the really smart people in businesses, go to fewer and fewer meetings, and the ones they attend, they've got real clarity about. So what common roles do you know about in meetings? If you can type in now and just send in ideas about the typical meeting roles that you see. Let's see what we've got. Oh, thank you. These are coming thick and fast. We've got leader, we've got chairman, scribe, facilitator, driver, peacemaker, pacemaker, knowledge, ideas man. Lots of different labels for roles in meetings. One top tip about facilitation: the best way to engage a facilitator, whether it's somebody in your meeting or in your organisation or outside, is somebody who does not have a vested interest in the meeting itself. Somebody who can purely focus on the people and the process of your meeting will get you the best result from a facilitator. Thank you for that contribution. Here's a newsflash. Now that we've named some of the roles involved in meetings, we stand a chance of overcoming them. And yes, I choose that word very purposefully, overcoming them, because here's the news. No matter which chair you sit in, no matter which role you think you play, it is your responsibility to make sure that that meeting is a success. It's time to stop looking at others and blaming them for meetings being a waste of time or for meetings going off track. You can help a meeting be on track by asking why you're there, by asking about the purpose. It's time to evolve, it's time to adapt, to communicate and get things done by taking responsibility.
So I have a question for you. We want to get the best for and from everybody in a meeting. I'd like you to think now about a meeting that you're in, perhaps the one that you thought about earlier, where we had those different faces. Have you ever been in a meeting where you weren't crystal clear, and I mean crystal clear, about the meeting purpose, about the outcomes or outputs that were expected from that meeting, what you're going to end up with, about the subject matter, or crystal clear about the expectations of you? We'd like you to vote on this, and this time it's slightly different. Take a look at those 4 things and let us know how many of those things you haven't been crystal clear about. Is it just one of those things that was missing for you? A couple? 3? Or even did you have a full house and all 4 weren't clear as you entered that room, entered that meeting? Okay, let's see what you've got. Right. Okay, so it looks like about a third of you have been unclear about one of those things. And about a third of you have been unclear about 2. 10% of you think you may not have been clear about 3. And a quarter of you, 25% of you, say at one point or another you have been unclear about all those 4 elements. Okay. So in order to get the best from people, we would advocate something different. First off, we say, get what you need in order to work effectively. If you're not clear, ask for that clarity. And also, if you're leading a meeting, set it up so that others can give of their best. Here is an absolute big bang top tip right here, right now. Helen.
One of the simplest things, and yet the most effective things that I've learnt to do in my career as a facilitator, is to signpost really clearly in the room the outcome, the agenda, and how we'll work together. You know, for years I was running meetings or attending meetings that didn't feel quite right, and I would attend training courses, I would read books in search of the Holy Grail. And then one day, about 15 years ago, a facilitator that I respect enormously said, Helen, it's simple, you're looking too deeply into this. Simplicity is key. And that is clear signposting that is super simple. Put up a chart in your meeting room, just like the one that you're looking at here, a simple flip chart. You don't need fancy graphics or anything too ornate, really simply. It's a chart that will stay in the meeting throughout the entirety of the meeting and something you can refer back to, so that if you find your meeting goes off track, or you have one of those people in the meeting who takes the conversation into a place that is off topic, a chart like this can help you back to purpose. A chart like this can help the behaviour in a meeting. A chart like this can signpost where we are. It's super simple and it works. So on the subject of giving people a point of clarity and a point of focus, you might imagine that you get this group in your meeting off to a really clear, intentional start. That's great, but you've got to continue with a really good process. You've got to get from the beginning of the meeting to the end with people staying engaged, with people knowing why their contribution's needed, and with people staying focused throughout. This is all about process. And I can tell you that it is the thing that is quite often overlooked in meetings. Often there's an agenda and a group of people, but not really a thought-through process, how we get from the beginning of the meeting to the end. What Catherine and I both observe with the people that we work with, and this is a bit of a tongue-in-cheek caricature of the sorts of meetings that we hear about in those organisations. I like to think of them as a straightjacket meeting, one that is a rigorous timed list, maybe 10, 15, 20 items on that agenda. Sometimes those agenda items are comprise the agenda items we didn't get through last time and just kept rolling over from one agenda to the next week after week. Or that there's not enough time for each agenda item to really explore and add value. A top tip coming at you is take a look at the agenda that you're next circulating. Make sure that it points to a very purposeful and intentional outcome. And as a rule of thumb, reduce your agenda list by half. Think about taking on each agenda item, giving it space, giving it time to be explored. Give time for people to understand the topic. Give a reason for why this agenda item on this day right now, why it's important. Give people the gift of time. Straightjacket agendas, for me, really inhibit creativity. They really inhibit what's possible with a group of people in a meeting room. If you think about it, your mind, just like my mind, is a bit unruly. It wants to go off in all sorts of tangents, in all sorts of directions. It wants to think about what I'm having for dinner, why that person across the meeting table is pulling that face. It wants to be unleashed. It wants to be free to do its own thing. My mind, maybe like yours, is a bit unruly and it wanders a lot. And if anybody came to me with a straightjacket agenda that was a timed list with way too much stuff on it, believe me, I would probably switch off at agenda item number 2. I might pop back in my mind when the agenda item really related to me, but I know that I wouldn't be giving my best at all of the other agenda items on there. The top tip, by halving the number of things on your agenda, is to give space for people's wandering and unruly minds to really engage and really play. I mean, after all, why were they invited to the meeting in the first place if there was going to be very little time to contribute? The picture to the right of this screen, I like to think of as the comfy jumper agenda. Some of our clients, especially in creative organisations, understand the idea of creativity and freedom and unruliness, and they go to the opposite end of the spectrum where everything is quite loose, quite fluid. And what we notice is that people with a comfy jumper agenda will have a more or less start time. People wander in, they might make coffee, they might reconnect and, say hi to everybody, and then eventually somebody will say, come on, we should get round to this agenda. And they'll play a while in it and maybe be a bit creative, but actually there isn't enough rigour in the agenda to really get the essence of what's possible with people working together. So the trick is to go somewhere between the straitjacket and the comfy jumper. is to get some rigor into your process design. How will people have their conversations and for what purpose? But give freedom as well. And you'll start to find that you get the right balance between both of them. The trick for you, whether you are the meeting owner, the participant, the expert, the facilitator, the leader, the scribe, the peacemaker, is for you to really think about how can I get the best value from every single brain in this room? What are your options to engage them?
So let's think about process a bit more and give you the opportunity to think about what this means in practice. We had a quick look at this chart a moment ago, the idea of the orientation chart. And to your point about keeping people focused, to your point about dealing with senior people, having this orientation chart up, which has that straight line through to purpose, is one of your key tools. Let's take a dive in here. And I'd like you to have a look through. So we've got the title. We've got a very clear outcome for this meeting, which in this case is agreement on a 5-year plan. And we've got an agenda, which walks us through a process of welcoming people, making sure they understand what the work is to be done, setting the scene, and then gives them an opportunity to discover where they've come from, where they are now, where they need to be, and plan how will we get there. And you'll see here that it's been set up that the ways of working for this group are to have a degree of healthy challenge and to have real focus. And we're going to focus together now on that line that says, where are we now? Imagine this. You ready? This is for you now to think about what a process option would be. What is the experience you'd take the group through? How would you get them working if you were getting them focused on where are we now? A chance to rigorously review the present, to understand the context from the point of view of 8 different people who are in a room. Imagine you've got an hour, and by the end of the hour, that where are we now piece needs to have got everybody in that room understanding the current context and rigorously analysed it. It's over to you now to send us some ideas about what different ways you could make that happen with a group of 8. We're going to step back, give you a chance to think, and look forward to what's coming in, and we'll report back to you. Okay, so ideas are coming in. We've got the SWOT analysis, a brainstorm session, to use photos, to use charts, to draw a picture, to create a timeline, to let them chat in groups and then regroup, to use post-it notes as a tool, to offer an open discussion. What else have we got? What else could you do? Great, this is terrific. So what we see coming in here, a whole mixture of ideas about using established tools to support a group's thinking, like we've got the idea of a fishbone diagram here, and then also a chance for people to be differently creative in the way that they work with this. Terrific. So seeing some of these, the differences to many agendas that get created is that simply what happens is the subject matter is lobbed onto the table and then everybody dives into talk. And from the questions and ideas that are coming into us about how do you stop people monopolizing the meeting, what do you do if nobody wants to speak, the process that you will choose for how you work with this will ensure that you get more contribution or more valuable and focused contribution from individuals. We'd like to share with you an option for what we might do in that strategy meeting. In that meeting. Thank you for your ideas.
So looking at the ideas that you've sent in, I would concur with some of them actually. The idea of doing a SWOT analysis would work well. There's a big watch out with SWOTs, and that is that quite often they're not done very well at all. So just a watch out. Here's a quick top tip about doing a SWOT. The strengths and the weaknesses of the subject that is being discussed. Make sure that your group and you think about what exists that is a current strength and is inside the team or inside the business. Same for a weakness. What is really weak that is current that you could point to that exists? Conversely, the opportunities and the threats that you may be considering don't exist yet. You can see them coming over the hill, you can see them coming towards you, but they're in the future and they're a little bit off in the distance. Oftentimes when I've observed a group doing a SWOT analysis, they forget those clear distinctions. So make sure that you SWOT up, if you like, pardon the pun, on your SWOT analysis work. Also, context map. Context maps can be a super way of gathering the information to understand the current situation. A context map might look like a mind map, if you like, with a depiction of the team or the organization in the center of a piece of paper. And around the edge, you will grab the bits of context that are pressing down on that team or organization right now. That might be economic trends, it might be competitor trends, it might be how employees or associates are thinking and feeling. It's like taking a giant Polaroid snapshot of right here, right now, such that you can see it right in front of you. What's interesting when we work with groups is when we're getting them to do work about thinking about the right here, right now, quite often the people in those meetings find it hard to just share the data of what is. They want to comment on whether that is good or bad, whether employee engagement is up or down, whether the competitor was first to market with a particular product, whether the economy means that we're all under sort of doom and gloom. The first step to understanding right here and right now is getting a clear picture of shared data without attributing any what's good and what's not. If you get the clear picture of information, the next step would be to assess. So what's working, where are we strong, etc. So think about a session about where are we now in two chunks. Getting the picture and then assessing that picture. One other point on process design before I move on is to say to you that let's imagine you've used some of these techniques that we've just shared for that part of the particular agenda that we're looking at. How dull would it be if you used similar tools every time you met? Or that for that particular agenda you used the same old methodology? Keep things fresh. It's okay to practice with different processes. There are lots of great books out there. There are lots of great resources to share. Email us. We can help you with process design. We can be thinking partners. We can give you suggestions about how you might vary or change up the flow of a meeting such that people feel excited to come to your meetings, or they feel really where did the time go? It flew by so quickly. I was so engaged in what we're doing. Another top tip is this. Build in time to think. I'm currently working on an agenda design for a big summit, and the client has given me a design that they think is going to work well, and guess what? From 9 o'clock on day one to 5 o'clock on day two, there is something happening. There are presentations, there are breakouts, there's something happening even through the evening. And I took a step back and said, there are reflectors in this summit group. There are people who will want time to think. And even extroverts, as extroverts still want to do their thinking out loud potentially, they still need time to do it. So give people the gift of time. Don't have back-to-back agendas with something going on. It's not sensible. If you want the best from people, you've got to give them space to think. And Well, Catherine and I were reflecting that one of the most hotly debated subjects, or one of the subjects that is guaranteed to get everybody in a meeting contributing, even the quietest of people, is the item which is all about the Christmas party. Now that might sound crazy, but people care about the end of year celebration. People, you know, want to remember last year when Norman from accounts did that thing and and wants to forget about it. People care about, will the bar be free? You know, will the bosses be there? You know, it's a subject that everybody cares about. And our challenge to you is, how can you make every item on your agenda as important to people as the Christmas party agenda item? How can you make it mean that much? Well, I'll tell you. Make sure that there is a clear purpose, and I know we're banging on about this, but it's so important. Make sure there is a clear purpose and that everybody in that meeting knows why they need to be there to contribute to that. If people know why it's them, why now, believe me, you'll get much more buy-in, you'll get much more contribution than if people turn up because it's Tuesday at 10 o'clock and I've always got to be here. Be intentional, be purposeful. We've been asked questions about fast meetings. You know, what happens if your meeting suddenly gets squeezed to 15 minutes or 5 minutes or 10 minutes? Well, you know, sometimes you've got to make a call. Ask yourself, can we do what we need to do in 10 minutes? Sometimes you might surprise yourself with it, actually, yes, we can be smart. If you can't, then postpone the meeting. You know, don't try and squash it in. Here is a top tip to help you have a fast meeting. You might want to make a note of this. If you know in advance that your meeting is going to be fast, share information with the meeting group ahead of time. But don't do it in a huge pack of pre-reads, please. Keep it to one page. And as you send out that one pager, ask the big question, like, how will we solve this problem, or what is it that we need to do to overcome this issue? Be clear in advance of the meeting about the shared goal and be clear about who you need, just like in a longer meeting. During the meeting, don't sit down. Stand up. It keeps people's energy going. Focus fast at the beginning of the meeting. Remind everybody why we're here. We've got 20 minutes. We're not going to let this run over. By the end of the 20 minutes, we must achieve this. Recap the context, why this is important. Give them the already known options and tell them we're looking for other options. Use a go-around process so that everybody around that meeting table or that meeting space knows that they're going to contribute and knows that they have maximum 2 minutes to make their contribution. Use a voting process to help narrow the options, and then ask, are we ready to close this? Are we ready to make a decision? And be ready to have a decision maker in the group. It might be you, or it might be an expert in the group, or it might be the senior person, or it might be somebody who is just the nominated person to call it. As soon as everything is finished, close the meeting. Don't linger. You may well find that your meeting is shorter than the time you thought. Quite often when a client says to us, we've got a whole day for this, we'll ask why. How come it's a whole day? Sometimes because a day is allocated, or half an hour is allocated, or half a day is allocated, people find a way to fill up the time. Treat your time like you treat your money. That's if you're good with money. Don't fritter it. Think timely, think in a focused way, get the job done. And then a word about content. Think about this. Quite often people come to a meeting to give information. They might do that in a PowerPoint deck, for example. They might do that as a monologue. People drift in, drift out. PowerPoint presentations, even if they're really well delivered, tend not to be engaging. Even a Q&A at the end of a PowerPoint presentation can result in the usual people in the room asking the questions. The same hands go up. Think about content in the way that it needs to be thought about, which is, what's the most important thing that we need to understand or share right now in order that we can meet our meeting goals? And then think about content like, well, like planting a seed. Start small. Start small with a start point. Get contributions. Let that seed grow through exchanging opinions, ideas, thoughts. Don't treat the content of a meeting as a commodity that will diminish. In other words, don't treat the content of a meeting as a one-way street. Treat it as something that will grow the more that it's shared. And by grow, I don't mean just growing with lots of hot air and noise and people's opinions and so on. Let it grow into understanding. And let the process that you use support the exchange of understanding. And by the way, to understand does not mean to agree. But only when you've actually understood, or the group has understood the content being shared, can they then stand a chance of agreeing or not. So create space for understanding and treat your content as a gift. The content of a meeting is one way that knowledge is grown. Knowledge is a resource, the value of which should increase with use rather than be depleted. So does everybody in your meeting need to understand the content? Well, I can tell you, somebody recently said to me, Helen, I put my hand up in a meeting once and I dared to ask the question, does anybody here actually know what a hashtag is? And she said everybody bar two people just keeled over laughing. And she started to feel a bit embarrassed that she was the naive person in the room. But two of the people put their hand up and said, actually, no, I don't. And no, neither do I, and I've never dared actually ask. What that meant she's called Jane, this lady, what that meant in Jane's meeting was that she'd named the subject, if you like. She had broken into an assumption that it's all right to ask the naive question. There's that hashtag. And it reminds me about the Emperor's New Clothes, the Hans Christian Andersen story. Remember? The tailors who were leading the emperor on to say only the very smart people will be able to see this cloth. Only the very smart people, Your Highness, will be able to recognize the finery and the quality of the cloth, and therefore the finery and the quality of you as an emperor. And as you know, the story goes that the emperor went out in his fine new suit of clothes. But it was the kid in the crowd, the one person who didn't know the rules, the one person who didn't understand that it wasn't okay to go with the flow. It was the kid in the crowd who put up his hand and said, but the emperor is naked. And what that did was let the scales fall from the emperor's eyes, and he was able to see that those tailors were not who they thought he was. And what Catherine and I know about running meetings is it's a really good and useful thing to have a naive perspective in the room. The person to ask the silly question, because we can tell you that questions are not silly no matter what they are. Everything about a good naive question will increase the value and the quality and the understanding by all. So coming back round, the meeting kaleidoscope is a way of really separating out and looking at the different clashing elements of the meetings that you have. Be clear about purpose. People understand that we are in this together. Whether you like the people in the meetings that you have, whether you feel that you have a friendship there, is irrelevant. What's important is that you have respect for their contribution and that understanding is reached. that the process is the key to unlocking what happens between the beginning of the meeting and the end in order that the overall goal is served. And that content is treated as a rich resource to learn from, to explore, to understand, rather than something simply to be traded. And one more thing.
So we've had a few questions come in at this point, and one of the ones that I'd really like to flag, because I think it applies to many people and more people as we go forward, is a question about virtual meetings. And the question was, can virtual meetings be as effective as face-to-face meetings? And the question is, what is it you need to achieve during that meeting? You can certainly make your virtual meeting as effective as a face-to-face meeting if what you need to achieve is the right thing. If it's about relationships, if it's about building understanding of a hugely complex piece of work, then we would advocate that actually, if you can, you get people together. However, if it's a piece of work which is perhaps more transactional, or you're working on a common base of understanding and you have some effective working relationships already established, then absolutely go for your life with a virtual meeting and apply what we've shared about making sure your purpose is really clear, making sure people know what they should be doing in that call and how they can add value. So using the same principles, the same approaches works perfectly. What you sometimes need to do is to take more time and also perhaps be more formal about the way that you're working. In that, it'll take, because you haven't got the cues of working together, you need to give more verbal clues about how to work in a group. And one more thing to share.
And back in the room. Yep, back in that meeting room. Back in that same room with the same setup, with the same chairs, with the same people in the same chairs, with the same old wonky flip chart and the marker pens that don't work, with the interactive whiteboard, which is quite good when it's working and there's somebody in the room who can remember how to fix it, and the same old, and the same old, and we need you to do something different. We need you to start sharpening those meetings. We want you to get out of the meeting trance, and this is your opportunity. It starts with you. The next time you catch yourself pointing or looking at somebody else in a meeting that you think it's their fault that the meeting drags on, it's their fault that the meeting is aimless, well, I've got news for you. It begins with you. Ask for what you need. Get clarity about why you're there, but get clarity about purpose. But know that it's not going to happen for somebody else. It must begin with you. And as you begin to get clearer and sharper, you'll begin to take notice of more and more successful meeting practices. And what will happen is other people will catch on. And before you know it, you know how it is, you'll start a new trend. So it begins with you.
I've got both good and bad news for you now. You can't unknow this now, and as Helen said, your awareness is raised and you'll be able to spot, by applying that Kaleidoscope framework, what's going on in a meeting. Your curiosity is pricked, and if you want to find out more, there are some things that we're doing that we'd love to share with you and meet you face to face. Virtual conversation has been terrific, and the engagement and the attention you've paid has been really good to see. We're going to be meeting in London on the 25th of November to do some work on amazing meeting practice, the big shifts. And you know what that means now, those shifts of the kaleidoscope that will make the massive difference with group. Some of the input that you've heard today, some of the insights that we've shared come from the meeting book. by Helen, which is just about to come out. And you'll see it's been published by Lid Publishing, who you can contact directly to get a copy of that, or it's also pre-orderable on Amazon. So we'd love to share more with you. Thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure to share ideas with you. Goodbye from the Facilitation Partnership.